say you're a manager and you got to 150 properties, you're going to have a decent percentage of those who are not prepared to invest in the property to actually take it to the standard that guests expect these days. Would you rather have a block of 25 really decent apartments, which are brand new, completely set up on the beach, or would you rather have 25 independent properties scattered over 5 miles? No question here. But what's going to book? They want something of the right size, they want it clean, they want it serviceable, they obviously want it in the right place. It's a hotel by any other name.
Welcome to the Wild West of vacation stays. While the sloppy, do-it-yourself managers are running around town giving the industry a bad name, professional management companies are working behind the scenes to standardize the industry worldwide. Our panelist today is the STR Board of Advisory of Yes Consulting, Richard Vaughton. He is joined by our co-host and Regional Director of Business Development at V-Trips, Miss Miriam Ramsey. Looking to bring us helpful nuggets of information is our host, the CEO and founder of V-Trips, Steve Milo. Steve, let us know if there's gold in them hills.
Hey, thanks, Heather. Appreciate it. And Richard and Miriam, thanks for joining me. Richard, I wanted to start off with you as someone in the UK and very familiar with Europe. And you're obviously on top of the news. You are an academic. You've invested in companies. You serve on boards. You're aware that in the U.S., the vacation rental market for the last 2 years has suffered pretty badly. And when I say badly, I mean we've seen occupied nights and ADR go down year after year. And 2024 appears to be another year where we're going in a reduction against 2023. So there's a lot of factors at work, but the bottom line is the U.S. market, ADR and occupied nights have decreased. We had Melanie Brown from Key Data a couple of weeks ago talk about it, and it's distressing. It's distressing for property managers in the U.S., particularly because most of their costs have increased. So labor being the big driver, but also rent, utilities, etc. On the other hand, the Europe market seems to be booming. Maybe not so much in the UK, but Europe has been booming. And I just kind of wanted to get to you and just see, what your reflection is. It just that Europe was behind the US on COVID recovery, and because it was behind the US, or there are other fundamentals at work that have made it so that Europe, in terms of ADR and occupancy, has just boomed, whereas the US has been declining?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Steve. And I'm probably going to say that we're a year behind you, to be quite honest, or 18 months behind you. And, having worked with a lot of American companies, you are privileged to actually speak one language and have one country. So that's a super benefit, because we've got 27 or 28 of these countries. And none of them are actually the same. But as an overview of what you've just said, certainly in the UK, from what I hear from the managers I speak to and a lot of the owners as well, we are now beginning to see a drop in occupancy. And we're seeing a drop in tourism as well. Now, I live in a tourist destination, one of the biggest ones in the UK in terms of counties, and we're 15 to 20% down in tourism. So, question why that is? UK compared to Europe. Before this call, I went on to have a look at the flights and the destinations and the amount of travel that's been going on over the last 6 months. And it's pretty clear that people are still heading in volume to the major destinations in Europe. So we're seeing all those destinations you hear about, your Amsterdams, your Malagas, your Barcelonas, your Florences, and everywhere are still seeing high levels of tourists. So in terms of occupancy, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to see as much damage as we're seeing in the UK, which is a particularly mature market, and it doesn't have the greatest weather, of course. And we're famous for traveling to Spain. I think Spain's up 9 or 10% inbound tourists this year. And And we're getting that reflection in all the newsprint, of course, all the time. I'm sure you see it over there. All the cities that you know about, the leisure cities in Europe, are all trying to figure out a way to reduce the number of short-term rentals. So I think you're right. I think we're still seeing a mountain of tourism, particularly in the hotspots in Europe, and we're seeing a pushback, and that's going to reflect on the future for sure. I'm in the UK, and we're just slightly depressed the period over this year for sure, and I think it's probably going to get a bit worse next year. So under demand, over supply, and I would blame the airlines very much to blame anybody in here, because your EasyJets and your Ryanairs and your Wizz Airs and everybody else, they are just pushing flights to popular destinations at very cheap prices.
So Miriam, have you been to Europe? Have you ever vacationed in Europe?
I have. You keep me in the States. You keep me confined to the Tennessee area. I will say that's very accurate about the flights, Richard. If you look in my market where I'm at, we have a smaller airline, but Allegiant offers to hire larger destinations to New York direct flights into Orlando super cheap on X days. So you're right. You're seeing those areas do decently, but I think that the airlines do play kind of a part into that as well here.
The data I was looking at is we're not quite back up to 2019 in terms of volume across the whole of Europe, but we are very close to it, I think, and we're seeing a focus on certain areas. I mean, there's probably a lot of drivers for this. And you can probably blame social media for a degree of it as well, because, you know, people want to go where it's popular and it's warm this time of year.
I was going to say, it's interesting to kind of take a look at this inbound, outbound, and I know the UK is unique because it's really not technically part of Europe, certainly after it departed from the European Union. But I do think, you know, taking a look at the US number of holders of passports, it's gone from 3% in 1990 to 42% in 2024. So a lot more people in the United States have passports, and we've seen a record amount of outbound travel, primarily to Europe, UK, Ireland, etc. And the reverse has not happened. Inbound from Europe and the UK has not rebounded from COVID. So I was going to ask you, Richard, what do you think some of the reasons are that international hasn't come back to the US? Is it as simple as the currency fluctuation, that the US dollar is so strong it's expensive to go to the US, or are there some other issues at work here?
Well, from a UK perspective, it's expensive. You know, the sterling is very weak. So would we go to the States if we had to? I mean, I went to the VRMA last year in Disney. I mean, from an Englishman's perspective, that was eye-watering in terms of how much you had to spend just to buy a little Disney badge, you know. So, you know, you get very aware very quickly, particularly Europe's not rich at the moment. You know, interest rates are still relatively high. Ours are higher here than other places, and you guys haven't actually reduced your interest rates yet, I don't think, either. So we are seeing these economic headwinds constantly, and I don't know if it's made a great deal of difference, but if you look at this year in Europe, we've had the Olympics in Paris. So, you know, are you going to go to Disney? Maybe you're going to go to the Olympics instead. We've had European football this year as well. So that's a massive thing for most of Europe. And you've got all the peripheral stuff going on at the same time as well. And we've got all these elections going on too. So there's a bit of reticence. You know, we've got Keir Starmer now in Labour threatening to tax us, but he's not telling us how he's going to tax us in the UK. So there's a little bit of resistance, I think, in terms of spending more than you budgeted for, which was probably not very much at the beginning of the year. So I think we got a lot of economic headwinds.
Yeah. So, Miriam, I'm going to get to you next. What I'm trying to just get around is, I think the last couple of years have been imbalanced with, at least on the U.S. side, with more U.S. domestic travelers going abroad than international travelers coming, and it's affected the U.S. VR sector. I don't think it's as simple as Europe is necessarily a better model than the U.S. I just think there's some macroeconomic issues at play, and obviously there's a whole global component here at work as well, which is that high interest rate, consumer credit is high. Europe, America, it doesn't matter. People are running out of cash. But Miriam, were you ever in a situation where you saw a lot of international travelers coming to Gatlinburg, or has it been as simple as a lot of the U.S. markets outside of Orlando or Miami or some of the urban places have really catered mostly to domestic travel, particularly by car?
Yeah, it's never been huge in this market. Typically, our range is 6 to 7 hour drive time is what we've seen. And look, and I guess that does really more make sense of being in the destination I am. Being able to have that slower drive. We see more from Florida, Alabama. In around majorly those markets. Pennsylvania is our biggest in our biggest locations. It's never really been a big international. Like, you're never going to be walking down the streets of Gatlinburg and run into 15 people from the UK. Possibly one, and how they stumbled into Gatlinburg is kind of questionable, I think, sometimes. But it's just not a market that we see that base of clientele.
Yeah. So, Richard, what I was going to ask you, because there was a lively debate on LinkedIn. Amy Highnote posted a LinkedIn message about Vacasa's second quarter earning, and there was a debate whether it was a Vacasa issue, or what it was a U.S. business model versus a European business model. And you had one consultant from Switzerland who said, European companies are just so much better run. I'm just curious if it's as simple as that, or if it's as nuanced as, there are a lot of headwinds right now in the U.S. market, and some of the European companies we're talking about, like Interhome, Aways, Sykes, are bigger than Vacasa, certainly by unit count, and certainly have more revenue and more operational continuity than some of the U.S. companies.
Yeah, that's almost a loaded question, actually, Steve. You run a company with how many? 3,500 properties, is that right? Yeah.
No, we're a little over 5,000, but we're in the neighborhood, right? And I think that's an important question to ask. Although unit count, I think, is probably one of the worst metrics. It's revenue. You need a certain amount of revenue to be able to meet some of your core G&A costs. But it's a valid question, right? Because your incremental profit starts to fall off once you are able to get a G&A level that allows you to basically scale as an enterprise company.
Yeah. So you make money, correct?
Oh yeah, we make money. We don't make as much money as I want this year. We've been profitable though every year we've been in business. I mean, every single year we have a budget. Every single year we have a budget to make a certain target. And this year we're off, which is disappointing. But we know what we need to improve for 2025, right? So there's no reason any company in the U.S. should not be making money. I mean, just none.
Okay, I think you've answered part of the question there. So, I can't talk about Vacasa's management because I don't know it. But I have worked for public companies, and I've been in public company IPOs, and I do understand the levels of administrative pressure, reporting, and then you end up with structural bloating on occasions. So I'm not saying that's the case, but that's what happens in a lot of companies. If you actually took what you've been talking about, Sykes, Aways, Travel Chapter, Interhome, I think were the four you mentioned. If you took Sykes and Travel Chapter, they are both predominantly UK. So Travel Chapter has 15,500 properties, I think. Probably, I don't know which they net, probably 15 million, something like that, because they're on an acquisition, they've been funded. Sykes to 30,000, I think, of which probably 22, 23,000 are actually self-catering accommodation cottages, that sort of stuff. They got caravans in there now, and they got forest holidays and things, so probably over 30,000 in total, and they must be turning in 30 million, 40 million, I guess, something like that. So they are profitable, and these are old companies, don't forget. They've been around a long time as well. But they are in a microcosm. They are in the UK, and the UK isn't that big. So you're almost like an OTA yourself in this country when you get to that scale. So you do have presence, you do have scales of economy. They are well managed companies. They are not full service businesses. And I think this is the thing that actually hurts a lot. You and I both know that the easiest way to get an owner is to go to them and say, listen, we do everything. We care for your property, we market your property, we're great at communication, we make you loads of money, sign here. Companies like Sykes and a lot of the smaller ones with anywhere between 50 and 500 properties, predominantly in the UK and in Europe, are not full service businesses, they're agencies. So they do have the privilege of not having to worry about staff, cleaning, laundry and stuff. They will have subsidiaries that do a certain amount of it, for sure, because of acquisitions. But they are more marketing agencies. So I think probably Evolve in the US, companies like that are more digital version of these businesses who call themselves management companies. I mean, my question to you, Stephen, I'm sure it's been on, it's on your lips, is Sykes, Travel Chapter, Interhome, I mean, Aways, they're almost self-limiting. What's going to happen to them, or private equity, apart from Interhome?
Yeah, so that's a kind of a question that I talk with investment banks, probably a couple every quarter, different ones. Some of the larger ones, even some of the more boutique investment banks. And, Richard, I think it's clear we're seeing the light toward the beginning of a new round of kind of capital, right? So there was a huge amount of capital that poured out right after COVID and capitalized a lot of companies. Even before that, the economy was robust in Europe, the UK, and the US, and companies from about 2014 through 2020 were being well capitalized. Which is how you had the rise of Vacasa and Sonder and some of these other larger companies. And then that all came to a screeching halt. And the screeching halt was because of inflation. Inflation is what wrecked really the investment community. It caused banks to retreat because they were scared about their balance sheet and the credit risk that's associated with higher interest rates. And money was no longer cheap. Now, as it appears that we're heading towards a global slowdown, probably recession, certainly in China and Asia, interest rates are heading down. You mentioned about the U.S. economy. The Fed is certainly signaling for rate cuts. They pretty much come out and said there'll be rate cuts starting in September. How big the rate cuts are, how many rate cuts, that's TBD. But my guess is that Europe will follow the U.S., assuming the inflation is down as well. And energy costs have been the primary driver in a lot of the countries, and energy costs seem like they're going down as well. So if all of this happens and interest rates come down, I think we'll start to see capital that's been on the sidelines start to deploy back into the industry. So the companies you mentioned, Aways being the one that put out the pitch book at a $2.1 billion market valuation. I'm not sure if that was realistic, but that's at least what the thumbnail was. We'll see if they get funded. We know that Sykes and Interhome certainly are probably going to be looking for a recapitalization. I do think, and I have heard, and I have talked to companies that are not just looking to invest in vacation rental companies because of their business model, their EBITDA potential, but also because of the PropCo. And what I'm talking about is, I think there's pretty shrewd investors that believe the PropCo has far more appreciation potential with vacation rentals than hotels, and that there's a higher ROI that's associated. So that if you can take this concept, which we all love, vacation rentals, and you can build controlled environments of purpose-built vacation rentals, and run them kind of in a hotel like way, you can achieve a much higher cap rate. I know I've said a lot, Richard, but that's my theory. And I've talked to groups out of India, for instance, who are very, very bullish, and they've invested a lot of money in the past in hotels and made a bundle, but they love the potential upside on the vacation rental piece.
Yeah, no, I'm really interested in that. I mean, I think it's Bob W, isn't it, that's got investment, and they're converting offices in downtown cities because they need to be converted because they're not being used as offices. They're almost certainly going to be a lot easier to get licensing to do that. They're going to be, as you said, they're going to be easier to manage. They're going to be completely AI integrated, and they're going to have all the automation and none of the overheads that hotels have. My question is, we have Airbnb out there right now, and Airbnb, although it's still making a pot of money, it's not going in the right direction for it. So we're hearing this narrative again. We're going to move to experiences. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. I wonder whether what you just said means that we're going to see a lot of the city destinations. There are a lot of complaints at the moment saying, we kind of like this. This is a good approach. It's well controlled. It's almost like a hotel. We can push the independent Airbnbs out because they're the ones that are making everybody homeless, even though they're not. It's kind of the politician's message. So, I completely agree with that in urban areas. I think that's a really, really, positive step forward.
So I want to talk to Miriam about this because she's been managing purpose-built vacation rentals in a sector of Gatlinburg called Smoky Cove, which I'm actually the developer. But Miriam, one, what do you think? What's been the reaction from the guests to the purpose-built cabins we built? And two, I'm throwing you a softball. How important are interest rates to getting investors to buy these purpose-built vacation rentals?
So to answer the first, guests are really liking the purpose-built. Initially, look, we done it very mindful, right? We looked at reviews. We seen what guests wanted, what guests were looking for on the initial book, and taking out a lot of the knickknacks and a lot of the junk that's not needed. So that was the one thing with purpose-built, is making sure that we're giving the guests what they want. Interest rates and all that. Look, someone buying one of our purpose-built, as long as it pencils, it makes sense. Interest rates right now and what they've been over the past 8 months, 10 months, very tough in the market that I'm in. We've seen the inflation of it. We've seen it all across the board. But guests are loving the properties. If you look at our properties that are the ones that we've done as purpose-built, are booked up for the majority of the year. But again, we have listened and give the consumer what they have wanted. But I think it's been really good. I think other owners are looking at, coming when they come into the markets, are coming up to visit. Hey, let's go look at the properties you're building, and kind of taking that idea and that concept and going back. And I had a conversation yesterday with a homeowner who has a couple of properties. In January, let's meet and let's go through the houses and change what we've done to what you guys are doing in Smoky Cove. I think people are seeing it and wanting to lean more towards that now.
Yeah. So Richard, a couple things. I think one, this industry started primarily vacation rentals with retrofitted second homes. So they tended to be people's second homes that they decided either because they weren't using them as much, or they changed their lifestyle, kids grew up, whatever, to convert into a vacation rental. And so you have a property that may or may not be optimized for the vacation rental. I think purpose-built is the next component, which is the property is amenitized precisely for a vacation rental guest. It's built from the ground up. So in Smoky Cove, every one of our properties has an indoor heated pool. We're up in the mountains, so it gets cool, but they're heated. They've got hot tubs. They've got floors that are easy to clean. They've got, the bedrooms are set up where the beds fit perfectly. We don't use a lot of space with closets, et cetera, et cetera. So we then open up the common areas to make bigger. Now, those things pencil out, and in particular, they're driven by interest rates or, the capital that's required. And as interest rates lower, it gets easier and easier to make the return work. So I think these things are tied together, but I go back to what I think is going to happen next. I think there's capital that's going to be entered the market, both in the US and in Europe. And they're going to be companies that are looking to not just want an opco, but also be able to drive a propco, because I think there's a huge opportunity on propco. And I think it's a segment that's right for the next, 100 years, right? It's just a much better business model than hotels. And you kind of mentioned all the things. You don't have restaurants, you don't have all of these core overhead costs that hotels have. And now you have marketplaces like Airbnb and like Booking.com and Vrbo, which you have consumers that clearly want vacation rentals if they have the right product. And, my guess is you probably would survey the board at Airbnb. At this point, they probably would prefer having purpose-built properties over shared housing, because it just makes so much more financial sense.
Yeah, I'm 100% behind you, Steve. If you said, do you want to start another management company in the way that we used to do it, I would say absolutely not. It's like herding cats. You're going to get 20-30% of the owners of the properties. Let's say you're a manager and you got 150 properties. You're going to have a decent percentage of those who are not prepared to invest in the property to actually take it to the standard that guests expect these days. Not only that, you've got this distributed inventory as well, incredibly hard to manage at a distance, and increasingly, So, I know managers I'm talking to now who are doing exactly what you're saying with property companies, because it makes sense. Would you rather have a block of 25 really decent apartments, which are brand new, completely set up on the beach, or would you rather have 25 independent properties scattered over 5 miles? So there's no question here. What's going to book? You're always going to have a subset of people who, they want the unmatched plates, or they want the particular flavor of a certain owner's wall hangings or something. But it tends to be the minority in my experience of guests. They want something of the right size. They want it clean. They want it serviceable. They obviously want it in the right place. It's a hotel by any other name.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about this interesting deal that was announced just a little while ago about Sonder and Marriott going into a partnership. And initially, I was kind of confused about it. It may still be confusing because I think they've been fairly generic with the details. But it appears that what this deal is that Sonder becomes one of the brands under the Marriott umbrella. So Sonder becomes a brand like Sheraton, like Westin, like Le Méridien, like Renaissance. They've got 37 brands. And that the Sonder inventory will display under the default setting of Marriott, which is very different than Marriott Homes and Villas. And my guess is that the reason why Marriott entered this agreement is that Sonder is assuring them that they can control the end-to-end consumer and guest experience in a way that, Turnkey and Vacasa can't, right? The Marriott Home and Villas Achilles heel, that they cannot control that guest experience. Were you surprised by that deal, and are you skeptical, or where are you at?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think everybody looked at it and went, "Wow." So, I mean, I did a stint with Stalford, as you know, and Sonder were, the ones that survived. Stalford didn't, Lyric didn't, and a whole bunch didn't. They weren't on top of their game like any other companies, of course, because it was all about who's gonna win the game, who's gonna race to the top first. But there's been a certain falling out, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but looking across the Atlantic at what Sonder's doing, because they never really made it into Europe, is they've become more hotel focused, almost like what you've been talking about, but in smaller numbers of properties, blocks of 4, 6. I've come across them in Barcelona and various other places. But what I thought was kind of curious about it is Marriott is actually trusting them to actually provide the quality, the service, the communication, everything that the Marriott would do themselves. And Marriott's got 8,800 properties, and the 9,000 properties that Sonder brings to the table amount to 0.5% of the total room inventory in the Marriott hotels. And curiously, the Marriott promised their shareholders that they would increase their inventory by 0.5% in their last call. So Sonder's sitting there saying, well, we've got 9,000 properties. And hey, listen, they're pretty nice, actually. We're doing a half-decent job on the display of them. I can't talk about the management, the operational structuring, or anything else. But we need some money because we've gone down below the dollar. We just crept back up again through dilutions. So how about we do a deal together? We give you the amount of inventory your shareholders are asking for. You give us credibility, and then we can go and raise 120 million and dilute ourselves out a little more, and the shareholders, it'll remain stable. In fact, I think the share price doubled overnight. So from a visual perspective, a monetary perspective, from an outsider looking at it, we'd probably say that's kind of a scratchy back deal. It's good for everybody. But we all know, the challenge coming forward on this. And that is, you're going to have to step up to the game with a Marriott if you want this to succeed.
Right. So, the challenge that Sonder has is, one, they're a leaseback company. They don't have an entity that owns the assets. Now, they may be changing a little bit of that business model. They did, as you alluded to, get $120 million of funding. Who knows? Maybe some of that funding is going through a propco to buy certain assets that then Sonder would manage exclusively. But for the most part, those are leaseback deals, and leaseback and arbitrage has never worked over time. It's just a terrible model. And the second thing you mentioned is the challenge of vacation rentals and hotel management is operational control, and that certainly hasn't been a strength of Sonder. They were really a technology company first and foremost. So it will be very interesting to see if Sonder can pull this off. Certainly, it's a better concept than Marriott Homes and Village, which has just been an embarrassment, which I'm surprised they haven't pulled the plug on. But Miriam, do you have Sonder in the Gatlinburg market, or is it more of an urban play?
No, it's more of an urban play. No, that we have not. Sonder is more of a higher end. We have one area, the Highlands of the Smokies. It's a new development of condos, which would kind of fit their scale. But no, they're definitely not in this market. If they were to come here, they would really struggle. Like, I think they've struggled, but I think it's just that different clientele, that different resort feel of what they're wanting to take.
Well, I'll challenge you on that a little bit, Miriam, and this has to do with where the future of the industry is going. One property that hasn't challenged, that's been very, very successful is Westgate, which you're familiar with. They burned down during the fire, but they rebuilt. That's that big, huge timeshare component, and they've run it like a hotel up on top of one of those mountains or ridges, and that's been very successful. But the problem with the timeshare market, or vacation clubs, as they call them, Richard, is, they just can't find people to want to sign those contracts anymore. People just got so burned on vacation clubs and timeshares, they don't want to do it. So, but the new opportunity appears to be, I think, I mean, again, if we want to look at the glass half full right now, because the U.S. market is in distress and Europe is slowing down and the UK has already slowed down, we can, or we can take a look at where the opportunity is. I mean, there are a lot of people who 5 years ago said that shared transportation and vacation rentals were really the two of the bigger industries of the 21st century. And I don't disagree for a second that vacation rentals are going to continue, because so many people on so many surveys, particularly younger people, say that travel is right at the top of things they want to do. And it's leisure travel, it's not business travel. And the young people in general would rather spend money on travel than even material goods. I don't think we're going back. I think, particularly after COVID, people have all of these ideas like, while I can, I want to travel. So then you need accommodations for them, and you need accommodations that they're going to be happy with when they go there. They're not going to, be stuck in a place that's just a horrible problem, which, Richard, I think is probably one of the bigger problems with Airbnb, which is why you've seen some slowdown on the Airbnb side, is guests who were loyal to Airbnb. And again, this was another thread on LinkedIn. I think you were on it. They were loyal. They had a great experience with Airbnb, and then they had that really terrible experience. And it was a disaster, and everybody was really turned off. And I think that's been the Achilles heel on Airbnb, is that the expectations or the experiences that people have vary so much on that channel. You can have an extremely good experience with a great host, but you can also have a horrendous experience on Airbnb. And it doesn't appear to be anywhere near kind of the, like with booking.com, where it's a more, maybe there's not as much high, but there's not as much low. But go ahead and talk about that, because I think that's a real problem with Airbnb.
Yeah, well, I'm 100% behind you on that as well, because we've all had good experiences. We've all had bad experiences, but just go to a conference and ask the audience how many of those people actually stayed in a hotel, and they're all in the holiday rental industry. And 70% of people say they stayed in a hotel. Admittedly, it's 3 nights, 2, 3, 4 nights. You've got the consistency. You're not going to use it for cooking. It's just somewhere to stay. But a lot of those people are actually saying, interestingly, a lot of them are actually saying, I'm getting a better result now on booking.com. So I'm seeing managers saying we're getting a lot more booking.com bookings now than we ever had, and Airbnb is not our prime supply. And I'm thinking, what happened here as well? So I think this consolidated travel business as well. So if you're going to travel, I use booking.com for car rentals. People are using it for flights and things these days as well. It's almost like a single source that's becoming more of an opportunity for them to make accommodation bookings, because they've got the extras to go with it as well. So I think we're seeing a change in the OTA part too, in terms of what they're focused on and where they're going to go. And let's face it, they're only going to book the stuff that actually guests really, really like, have great reviews, and are a sensible price. So I do see Airbnb being more and more challenged by the micro businesses, individuals who think they can just let an apartment, stick a door lock on it, and stick some towels in it, and call it an Airbnb. It's not good enough. It's just not going to be good enough in the future. So
Airbnb does not control the end-to-end experience either. So they were like Marriott Homes and Villas, right? But on a broader scale. I think it's interesting you mentioned booking.com. I prefer actually using booking.com over Airbnb, because I don't get the Wild West experience with booking.com. I don't know if it's because booking.com caters more to professional managers. That's probably the case. But I just don't get the variance. And I don't want the risk when I rent a vacation rental. I just want a good accommodation that's clean, that's got Wi-Fi, et cetera. I don't need to meet the host. I don't need to, have all this nonsensical stuff that Brian Chesky seems to talk about with shared properties. What I want to avoid are some of the nightmare experiences I've had on Airbnb where the property looks nothing like the pictures, where it's in a dodgy neighborhood, or you're in a neighborhood which the residents don't want you there. I mean, that is just the worst experience, and we've all had them. Miriam, I'm going to ask you, last couple times you've been on, you've been a little pessimistic. Bookings have been increasing and pacing much better. Do you think it's as simple as U.S. travelers returning back to the U.S., domestic travelers deciding it's cheaper to travel in the U.S. in 2025? What do you think the reason that we've seen such a good increase in bookings over the past 30 days?
I think folks don't have the money to travel out of the country. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Everybody is tight on a budget, and we have to stay close to home. And it's getting through the next 3 months, getting through the election, and seeing what happens after that. I think it really goes down to credit card debt, people holding on to the money that they have, and they still want a vacation, but let's keep it a little more tight and see what we have in the next 4 months. That was positive, right?
It was positive. Yeah, so Richard, I kind of wanted to tie a bow around this U.S. versus European property manager discussion. I don't think it's as simple as saying that European property managers are better operators or that the market's better. I think it's the markets are cyclical. Currency has an impact. Inbound, outbound travel has a significant impact. We certainly saw during COVID when domestic travel was at its peak, certain countries did phenomenally well. The US was one, UK was another, Germany was another. And then as borders opened up and the German travelers, the UK travelers, the US travelers got to start to travel to destinations like Spain, like Italy, et cetera, those countries benefited at the expense of the domestic. I do think there was a cycle probably going back. In terms of where I think this industry is heading in this next round of capital, because there will be another round of capital coming. I'm confident between the money that's parked in the Middle East and Asia, India in particular, that they're looking to put money into US real estate assets, or the UK or Europe. We're going to see this propco, opco model, right? And not done the way AvantStay tried to do it, but done in a smart way, where you whether you're buying an apartment building, a condo, an office, as you say, and reconverting it into residential, or you're doing what we're doing in Smoky Cove, where we have 50 acres plus, and we're developing, these properties in a very controlled expense management, and they're all tied together so we can easily operate them. That's what you're going to see. I mean, you're going to see what, most people would think is a logical way of building a propco. What do you think? Because I guess you've seen a lot, and you've seen a lot from the UK and Europe side, and I'm curious if you believe that this propco will grow as much as I think.
Well, if there's a wall of money out there willing to be put into, let's call it the vacation rental industry, even though it could be business as well, it makes sense to put the money in that space. So I've been dealing with some M&A work with small leisure companies in Europe and the UK, for example, and the vast majority of managers in Europe have somewhere between 70 and 80 properties. And there are thousands and thousands of them, and they're all lifestyle businesses. That happened in the UK, and probably the best part of 100, 120 of these companies were swallowed up. And that's why we have these big companies in the UK, Sykes, Travel Chapter, Original Cottages, and the rest of them. That's how they grew. I don't think we're seeing that as much anymore. It's too expensive to go and buy small companies because they're not actually that profitable a lot of the time. They're not structured for a sale. They're structured as a lifestyle business. They don't come with all the I's dotted and T's crossed in terms of an acquisition. So although UK's done it, I think it's going to be quite a struggle across Europe in the vacation, leisure, growth stuff that Vikas has done. And to a degree, what you've done as well in V-Trips, of course, because you bought companies. It's just getting harder, I think. And the larger companies look at it and they say, I could spend half that money and still get the same amount of organic inventory just through direct marketing and putting somebody on the ground to get out there and pull it in, even though the churn rates are a lot higher, of course. So I think that's not as attractive. And there are not many large companies left out there to actually swallow up to increase your inventory by 10 or 20%. There's very few of them, in fact. So I think everything you said holds water. I think this, if you've got a lot of money and you want to actually make money out of it, but I do actually know a lot of managers who say, I'm looking for a block. I'm looking for a block to manage because I can actually put one cleaner in there and they can clean the whole thing over a period of the day. I don't want this 25-mile spread. We've got to have vans and everything else to go with it. It's very hard miles. It's a very hard task to actually to do that. So I agree. I think if there is money out there, that's where it is likely to go. And I think we've seen that with the likes of Bob W. and other companies as well. I guess that reflects on Sonder too. If there is an opportunity for them to, be in that space, then they would have great leverage through the Marriott as well, through the 150 million loyalty program, whatever it is. So yeah, I think you're on point with that.
Well, clearly, I will say, and again, we talked about this in this thread on LinkedIn, the Vacasa business model did not work. I don't think it's because they were a U.S. company. I think, number one, they were never a technology company. They poured too much money into technology that was not their core competency. They're actually inferior with their technology as opposed to if they've gone with hosted systems, right? So I think just clear cut, if you're going to run an operating company in the vacation rental space, you want to stay out of technology as much as possible and partner with best of breed, whether it's Guesty, Hostaway, Web-a-Track, whoever. Let them develop, and then hopefully you can negotiate an open API where you can build additional tools. The other thing is, Vacasa did not manage their cost at all. And I think, again, it was because leadership was brought in to grow the company and not to worry about expenses. And they never had seasoned leadership that understood how to run a P&L. I do think the question of Europe is the seasoned companies out there, the Aways, the Sykes, the Interhomes, et cetera. You've got people that are running the company, that are staffed at the company, that are extremely P&L driven. And that's what you need if you're going to run a business. Hell, I mean, if you're running hotels, that's what you're running. You're running a business based on budgets and variance reporting, not based on trying to grow revenue at all costs. So just, Vacasa was just unfortunately built for the wrong space. They were never a technology company. They were a hospitality opco, and they were never built to be profitable. But Miriam, I'm going to give you the last word. Do you have anything you want to add to this discussion?
Why do I always get the last word? No, I definitely think the European market is very similar based with the US. I think it was very interesting, and I'll go back to the beginning. When he said he feels where he is 8 months behind us, like if that's the case, it's going to be a little bit of a rocky road for you coming up. But again, I think we take a couple of key takeaways. I think travel, staying local is where it's at, but I also feel COVID is coming back around. Kids just went back to school. You see that increase, which is also going to result people not traveling out of the country or as far coming up. So, but I think 2024 is going to rock and bang out, getting ready for 2025 to see what that entails.
I was going to say, I'm glad to see Miriam being optimistic. She was a little negative and pessimistic the last couple podcasts we were on, but the latest round of advanced bookings have been encouraging. So she's more cheerful.
You did mention COVID, unfortunately. So
Yeah. But hey, I got
Yeah.
it was fine. We're good. We all had it multiple times, probably.
All right. Well, hey, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Miriam, for another great episode of StraightFireVR.com, and appreciate it. Thank you.
To watch previous episodes of Straightfire VR, go to www.straightfirevr.com. For questions and comments, you can reach us at straightfirevr@gmail.com.